So welcome back for AP Bio. This is the last lecture for, well, a while I guess, till we have a test. Dealing with plant reproduction. So we're going to deal with how do plants reproduce, and there's some questions that go with this and some book readings. So plants turn out to have some unique characteristics that describe them, and it has nothing to do with whether they can do photosynthesis or not, or if they make their own food. It actually has to do with very subtle things. The first one is, as long as a plant is alive, they will grow. Second thing is, their cells, provided the cells aren't dead, can become whatever tissue they need to be. They have plasticity. Plants have both of those characteristics, and they're rather unique like that. When we look at plants, the lower plants, meaning the less evolved, more primitive, not as complex plants, are typically called avascular plants, and meaning they don't have vascular tissues like xylem and phloem. What they do when they undergo reproduction is they have something referred to as the alternation of generations. So they will have a form that's referred to as a sporophyte, meaning if it were to attempt to reproduce, it can only reproduce asexually. And when it's ready, it will actually produce things that we call gametophytes, which are the female, or the male and the female parts, or the things that are capable of sexual reproduction. And it alternates between a form that has spore makers, or it makes gametes, so sperm and egg. Plants have not been as obvious as they are here, as in we go from avascular plants to the gymnosperms to the angiosperms. The difference in the alternation of generations, the size and the prevalence of the gametophytes have diminished. So when we look at angiosperms, they happen to have some rather unique anatomy, so they happen to have roots and shoots. Part of the shoot system will be the development of leaves, and part of those leaves would end up being flowers. They turn out to have all sorts of little things like what we call lateral buds and apical buds and meristems, which turn out to be rather fun. And at some point I hope we can really talk about plant anatomy, even though everyone's poo-pooing plant anatomy. But if I cut them in half and actually look at their vascular system, they turn out to be rather different. Not all angiosperms are alike. And what we notice is we start to get a pattern. We can have one pattern here where we just have these vascular bundles, which are xylem and phloem. Xylem, which is this first word, conducts water from roots to shoots. Phloem conducts sap, which will be metabolites in water from the shoots down to the roots, typically, although you can do a little bit of other manipulation there. But if I look, some happen to have a rather loose-looking set of vascular bundles, xylem and phloem, and others have very defined xylem and phloem. These differences end up helping us figure out these things that we call monocots and dicots. Cot stands for cotyledon, which is a primitive leaf found inside of the seed. The goal whenever we replicate plants, or when plants reproduce, is to take pollen from the stamen to the pistil, from the male gametophyte to the female gametophyte. And these are all flower parts that hopefully you remember. And what you'll notice is the bottom of the pistil, which is the ovary, is going to start to swell up. The petals will fall off, and a fruit is going to form. Inside of that fruit, we're going to have seeds. When we pollinate, so when we move the pollen from the anther to the pistil, there are three versions of this that can ever happen. We can require it so totally separate plants will fertilize each other, and they're giving you a name for it, of xenogamy, meaning foreigners are reproducing. We could have it from the same plant, but it has to be from separate flowers. So gynogamy, excuse me, I usually don't say these words because no one does. So it's not going to be the same flower, but it's the same plant. So it's going to be very, very similar in terms of its genetics. Or you could have autogamy, which is where the same flowers, so you could have a stamen right here, you could have the pistil right here, and this stamen can pollinate this pistil. And that would be the easiest thing to do in terms of self-pollination. But not all plants need to do that. They can undergo a asexual version of reproduction, and there's two different versions of this. One of them is called vegetative reproduction, which would be you could have branches that go horizontally, spread out, send down roots. You could kill off the horizontal branch, and now you have two separate plants. Or we do this where you could take a cutting from a plant and you could plant it in the ground and it'll start to grow. Or there's this rather odd thing referred to as apomixis. Apomixis is basically where you make seeds or something seed-like, but that seed-like structure was not formed through the process that you make sperm and egg. So it's an asexual way of making a seed or a seed-like structure. The whole point of all of this is to produce fruit, and that fruit is there for seed dispersal. Obviously, we think of it in terms of animals or humans, where we eat it, then we defecate out the seeds, thus spreading the seeds out. But there are other versions. I mean, we could have seeds that explode open, or they fall into the water and they spread that way, or the wind moves the seeds. There's all sorts of ways that we can move seeds around, and it all has to do with using that fruit to disperse seeds, which obviously will give them some type of selective or evolutionary advantage.